For the past few weeks, players have talked about these two characters a lot, and I'm no exception. I've fully analyzed their kits and given my overall thoughts on them, but I still get comments about if they're worth pulling if they already have a DPS or a sustain, or any other reasons. In this video, I'll give my opinion on why you should or maybe shouldn't pull for any of these two characters. This is not a comparison video, as these two characters are completely different on what they do, so there's no point to it. So without further ado, let's get started. Starting off with Acheron, well, to put it simply, she is a lightning nihility main DPS character with a crit based kit design, which means even though she is a nihility character, she doesn't work with dots like how most of our nihility characters as of now. She is mostly like an erudition character with a multi-target skill and a massive AoE nuke as her ultimate. The interesting thing about her is the fact that she does not need any kind of energy but relies on a stacking system for her ultimate. And another unique thing is in one of her passive. This thing increases her damage based on how many nihility characters you have in the team, except herself. To max out this, you need two other nihility characters, which is totally worth it, as this damage increase is for the final damage. It's not a damage boost multiplier, so it's kind of a step up from any damage boost you get from other sources, making her one of the best damage dealers to come out so far. And looking at this, I would obviously recommend you guys to pull for her, but every good thing does have a bad side. Having a massive damage boost in her kit is great and all, especially with her already great multipliers, but this also gatekeeps her into only using nihility characters in her team, and prevents her from using any other premier supports like Ruan Mei or the newly released Sparkle. Of course, there are great nihility characters out there like Pella with her defense shred and Silver Wolf, and they do provide quite a lot of damage increase to her kit, but they are still inferior to what someone like Ruan Mei provides. She gives her whole team close to 2 damage sphere worth of damage boost from a skill that has a 100% uptime, not to mention other godly buffs, and any of the nihility characters can't really compete with that. This does get changed to some extent with her E2, which does allow her to use someone other than a nihility character, but I'm not gonna focus too much on vertical investment. Her unique playstyle not only restricts her with teams, but also has some issues with builds. As a standard crit based DPS, relics are not a problem, but when it comes to light cones, this is where it gets a bit complicated. Apart from her signature, not many other nihility light cones who work that well with her. The only one that does provide similar value is Good Night Sleep Well at higher superimposition levels, which is a gacha light cone, and many might not have that. Of course, I'm not saying all the other light cones are completely useless. You can use other options like Well's light cone or something like Resolution Shines, but the difference between these and her signature is like night and day. Lastly, the thing I want to talk about the most is her overall playstyle. Now recently I talked about her ultimate being an AoE nuke, which is both great and bad for certain contents. Like, it's great for speedrunning where you can stack a ton of buffs or debuffs in her case and wipe the entire phase with her ultimate, but this also makes her pretty reliant on her ultimate being her highest damage attack, and this amount of damage in one attack is actually bad for some places. Like Pure Fiction, I actually overhyped her Pure Fiction performance in my analysis video. Given her AoE coverage, I had come to the understanding that she might be great for it, as AoE is what you need the most, but the fact that even though her ultimate is a chain of multi-target attacks with an AoE finisher and you can choose the target, the whole thing is actually considered a single attack. So even if you manage to clear the wave with her first 2 hits, the enemies will not respawn immediately. They will only respawn after you've completed her ultimate, which results in a lot of extra damage getting wasted. Her damage ratio between her skill and ultimate is pretty messed up. You can see that here in this chart. Compared to her ultimate, her skill is pretty much non-existent, and this becomes a problem for a content like Pure Fiction, where you want consistent AoE damage. Of course, not every character have to be good in Pure Fiction, but this type of damage loss actually affects any battle with extra mobs, even in MOC. Like, let's compare it to some other DPS characters, right? Here I have Jingliu and Imbibed Lune. You can see that they have a pretty decent damage ratio across their kit, which makes them super versatile enough to be used in every type of content. A great plus for any DPS. But these two don't have AoE attacks, right? So let's compare her to a character with similar playstyle. Argenti. He's also a character who mostly rely on his ultimate for massive damage. But what sets him apart is the fact that he can use a lesser version of his ultimate, so that he won't have to waste extra damage. But Acheron doesn't have that luxury. One other thing that I want to point out is the fact that she doesn't use any energy. AoE attacks are great for dealing with mobs, not only because of the damage, but also the energy you gain from defeating them. This is exactly why Argenti is great, as not only he defeats all the mobs by his ultimate, but the amount of energy he gains back makes his ultimate close to being full again. But Acheron uses a stacking system, so she can't really take benefit from this as well. But then again, since she uses a stacking system, you can actually pull off a 2 to 3 turn ultimate with her, which is a huge thing, as her ultimate deals mad damage. As I said, every good thing has a bad side, but the opposite is also true. Every bad thing has a good side as well. And these are just some of the things I came across after analyzing her kit a bit more. Of course, at the end of the day, these are just pre-release thoughts. I might be completely wrong, and she might become the best DPS in the game after her release. And if that were to happen, you guys can come back to this video and criticize me all you want. By the way, if you have reached to this point of the video and like what you're watching, consider subscribing to the channel, as it does help this channel grow and motivates me to make more content for you guys. Now let's talk about Aventurine. He's an imaginary preservation character with a great sub DPS potential. Right now we are pretty close to completing 1 year of this game, and the meta have developed quite a lot. Initially just surviving in the harder content was the main goal, but now as the cycle limit have decreased for MOC, surviving is not the main goal. In fact, players are more focused on dealing the most damage, and this is where a character like Aventurine shines. Him being able to dish out quite a lot of damage without affecting his defensive abilities is what makes him great. His kit mostly have 2 main aspects. One is his shield, which can be applied through his skill and lasts for 3 turns. So there is no energy or rotation problem, and this shield can be stacked. And that is where the second part of his kit comes around. He has this unique point system, where if any of his allies get hit while they're inside his shield, or if any of them uses a follow-up attack, he gains a point. And after a certain amount of points, he launches a follow-up attack. And this thing not only deals pretty good damage, but it also applies a weaker version of his shield from his skill, which also lasts for 3 turns. And if the allies are already under his shield, then this small shield just gets stacked up. And since this does last for 3 turns, and with his constant follow-up attack, refreshing his shield, you might as well never want to use his skill unless it's absolutely necessary, making him insanely SP efficient. His ultimate is just a single target attack that deals imaginary damage and inflicts a kind of a debuff on the target that makes them take more damage. Also, his ultimate instantly gives him some points. With this, and the fact that he gains points whenever any of his ally gets hit, and that counts for multi-target hits as well, he gets to use his follow-up attack so often that is kinda ridiculous. This is why his overall damage contribution is so high for any team. He also provides some utility through 50% effect res, but it says here that it's for single target, so it's still a bit confusing how it works. It will be clear after a release. Anyways, just like for Acheron, every good thing has their bad side as well. But for Aventurine, it seems that's not the case. At least not to the extent of how things are for Acheron. The main thing to consider is how hard it is to build him. Like characters that fulfill 2 different roles at the same time and focus on several different stats are usually hard to gear. Like Aventurine is a shielder who needs defense, but also scales with crit, so having a decent crit ratio is also required. Fortunately, his attacks does scales off his defense, and he does get like 40% crit rate from his traces, so it's much more manageable. I did come out with some build examples that I also showed in my initial analysis video, and you guys can see here, like even though these stats looks incredibly unrealistic, but with his passive and bonus stats, these builds can be easily achievable. It's all about how lucky you are with relic farming in this game. For his light cones as well, apart from his signature, there are other options like the free-to-play MOC light cone or the new upcoming event light cone. Both are great for him. There isn't much to discuss. He's a solid character. He fills the role of an offensive sustain, and since his kit is designed for damage, he scales very well with any kind of buffs the team get from any harmony characters. Not to mention he applies a debuff, so he can be a really good character for Acheron. Or with his compatibility with follow-up attacks, he can also be well paired with any follow-up attack teams as well. All in all, he's an all-rounder with great potential on any kind of team. So after all this, should you pull for them? Well, from all the things I said about Aventurine, you guys can already tell that Aventurine is totally worth it. There isn't much discussion. He's just a great character. And since he's a support slash sub DPS, it's hard for him to get power creep. I did make a video about how he compares to Fu Xuan, so if you want to check that out, I'll leave the link to that video in the description. Acheron on the other hand is an interesting case. Since she's a DPS and with a pretty niche playstyle, it's possible for her to be power crept in the future. But like, she isn't even out yet. Let's not talk about power creep already. For her pull value, I think she does have some issues or some uncertainties that needs to be tested further. But are these uncertain things makes for a bad character? I don't think so. I think these new kit design and playstyle will open a whole new way to play this game. There might not be a Nihility support right now that is as good as a character like Ruanmei or Sparkle, but there will be at some point. A character that seems incomplete right now doesn't mean she will stay like this forever. I personally think she's a great lightning DPS and is worth the pull if you already don't have a fully built lightning team or a well built DPS in general. But if you already have that part covered, then she might not be worth it for you. I'm saying this because my recommendation is always to expand your roster. Have a well built team for every element. And right now, the best lightning team is probably a Kafka dot team. That team is shredding through content right now, even with mediocre stats. But it took several patches to get here. Kafka, Black Swan, Ruanmei. To complete this combo, we had to go through several months. So if you're someone like me that already have this team ready, then Acheron might not be the best choice for you. But if you're someone new, then I'm not gonna tell you to wait for their reruns and just skip the upcoming characters. Let me tell you this, new characters will always be better than the old ones. That's just the cold hard truth. So just aim for the future. The only thing that's worth it in the past are insane supports like Ruan Mei. Other than that, just pull for future characters. And Acheron is exactly that. Right now, she might seem underwhelming with her unique playstyle, but all the upcoming supports and content will be focused around Acheron. And for a character like Kafka, who knows when they will be back? Acheron will be a better choice to build a team around and stay up to date with all the content. And with that, I've said what I wanted to say about if these characters are worth the pull. I tried to be as objective as I could, and I think I did a pretty decent enough job explaining my point. But if you disagree and don't care what I say, and just want to pull for them because you like them, well then, who am I to tell you otherwise? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in my next video.